The sun was just beginning to dip behind the jagged mountains of Arizona, casting long shadows across the desert. The air was dry and warm, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush. In a quiet corner of the land, a young Apache girl named Ayanna knelt beside a sparkling river, her dark hair tied back in a simple braid. It was her time to wash clothes, a daily task she did with skill and care. She hummed softly as she worked, the peaceful sounds of the river mixing with the songs of the birds in the trees above. Ayanna was a striking young woman, known throughout her tribe for both her beauty and her strength. She was one of the tribe's daughters, raised to be a fierce protector of her people, as well as a careful keeper of tradition. Her father, Chief Tashunka, was respected by all, and Ayanna held her tribe's customs close to her heart. Every day, she would do her part in maintaining the traditions and responsibilities that came with being part of the Apache Nation. As she was rinsing the clothes in the water, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Startled, Ayanna quickly stood up and glanced toward the noise. She saw a man, a stranger, walking toward her. He was tall, with light skin and light-colored hair, clearly not from the Apache tribe. His clothes were strange to her eyes, but his face showed a look of curiosity and confusion. The man was looking down, clearly focused on something in front of him, unaware of Ayanna standing by the riverbank. Before Ayanna could speak, the man looked up and saw her. His eyes widened, and he froze in place. The moment felt as if time itself had stopped. Ayanna stood still, feeling the rush of heat in her cheeks. In that instant, she realized that he had seen her. In her rush to stand up, she had unintentionally exposed herself for a brief moment. It was nothing she hadn't done before. Bathing alone at the river was a common task for the women in her tribe, but the sight of the stranger made everything different. The man was not a member of her tribe, and now she was not only embarrassed but worried about the consequences. The man quickly turned away, his face reddening. He muttered something under his breath, clearly apologetic, but Ayanna was already feeling the sting of humiliation. She didn't know if he had meant to see her, but in her world, such a moment was dangerous. Apache customs were strict, especially when it came to the privacy of women. A mistake like this could bring dishonor not only to her but to her family and her tribe. Ayanna's heart raced as she walked toward him, her steps firm. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She was angry, yes, but also scared. She had to act quickly. If word of this incident spread, it could destroy her reputation forever. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could happen next. The tribe would not take kindly to this. Her father, Chief Tashunka, was a man of strong principles, and Ayanna could already imagine the disappointment in his eyes if he found out. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood before the man. "You saw me undressed?" Ayanna said in a voice that, though calm, carried the weight of an undeniable truth. "Now you must marry me, or we will both be punished." The man looked at her, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the right words. He was stunned, completely confused by what she was saying. His brow furrowed in confusion, and he took a small step back. "What?" he asked, his voice unsure. Ayanna narrowed her eyes, unwilling to give in. She had no choice. In her world, if a man saw a woman in such a vulnerable state, the woman had to either marry him or face the shame and punishment that came with dishonor. It wasn't just about her. It was about her family, her people, her tribe. She could not bear to let them down. This was the only way to preserve her dignity. The man was clearly confused, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the situation. He stammered, I didn't mean to. I didn't see anything. I didn't want to." Ayanna interrupted him, her voice firm. "It doesn't matter whether you meant to or not. The rules are clear." She could see the fear in his eyes now. He was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. His skin flushed with embarrassment, but he knew there was little he could do. He had indeed seen something he wasn't supposed to see, and now he was caught in the tangled web of Apache customs. He could not simply walk away without facing the consequences. I don't know what to say," the man said, his voice faltering. "I never meant to—" Ayana raised her hand to silence him. It doesn't matter. The decision is made. The man stood there, speechless, his mind racing for a solution. He had no idea what he was supposed to do. He wasn't a part of the Apache world. He was just a traveler passing through, someone who had wandered too close to their way of life. But in that moment, he understood that he had become a part of something much bigger than himself. Ayana, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes, knew there was no turning back. The customs of her people were as clear as the river that flowed beside them. If he had seen her, if she had exposed herself in front of him, the only way to save face was for him to marry her. The silence between them grew heavy, broken only by the sound of the river flowing gently in the background. The man, whose name Ayana still didn't know, finally nodded slowly, his mind coming to terms with the situation. "All right," he said, his voice quiet but resigned. "I'll marry you." Ayana's expression softened just a little, but her heart still raced with the tension of what had just transpired. She had not wanted this, but there was no other choice. And so, with that simple, quiet agreement, the strange bond between them was formed. Two people from different worlds, now tied together by fate and custom. Part 2. The Reluctant Agreement, the days that followed the unexpected meeting at the river felt like a whirlwind for Thomas Gray. He had never imagined that a simple walk for water would lead to such a strange and life-changing encounter. Now the reality of his situation was settling in, and the weight of his agreement with Ayana, the young Apache girl, weighed heavily on him. Thomas had grown up in the American East, far from the deserts and rugged beauty of the Arizona wilderness. He had traveled west in search of opportunity, hoping to find work and perhaps build a new life for himself. But what he had found instead was a world unlike anything he had ever known, one filled with challenges, misunderstandings, and now, an unexpected marriage proposal. When Ayana had insisted that he must marry her after their accidental encounter at the river, Thomas was completely caught off guard. He had tried to explain that he had not meant to look at her, that it had been an innocent mistake, but in her eyes there was no room for misunderstanding. It was clear that the Apache people lived by a strict code of honor, one that was unyielding, even to the most innocent of accidents. Thomas knew that if he refused, it would bring shame and dishonor to both him and Ayana. And although he had no desire to marry her, especially not under such strange and forced circumstances, he could see no other way out of the situation. The look in Ayana's eyes, fierce and determined, told him that she would not back down. She was not asking for his love, only his agreement to fulfill a custom that had been in place long before either of them had been born. With a heavy heart, Thomas agreed to marry her, knowing that his life would never be the same. The decision was made and there was no turning back. But even though the marriage was agreed upon, neither he nor Ayana knew exactly what it would mean for their future. The next day, Ayana led Thomas to her village, her steps steady but her heart uncertain. As they walked, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had made the decision to ask him to marry her, but now that it was happening, she wasn't sure if it had been the right thing to do. The village would undoubtedly gossip about the strange arrangement, and her father, Chief Tashunka, would have many questions. But the weight of honor and tradition was too great for Ayana to back out now. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with it. Thomas, on the other hand, was filled with a mixture of confusion and reluctance. He had never imagined he would end up married to an Apache woman, and certainly not like this. As they walked through the desert landscape, he couldn't help but notice the differences between their two worlds. Ayana seemed at home here, moving with the rhythm of the land, while Thomas felt like a stranger in a place he couldn't quite understand. When they arrived at the village, Ayana's presence seemed to command attention. The people of the tribe paused in their daily tasks, their eyes following the unusual pair as they walked toward the central area of the camp. Chief Tashunka, Ayana's father, stood at the front of his home watching the two of them approach. His face was unreadable, and Thomas could see the weight of authority in the chief's gaze. Ayana's heart pounded as they neared her father. She had not yet spoken to him about the marriage, and she dreaded how he would react. He was a man of great respect, and she knew that any misstep would be noticed. The decision to marry Thomas had not been an easy one, and she hoped her father would understand her reasoning. "Father," Ayana said, her voice steady but soft. "I have brought Thomas with me." Chief Tashunka nodded but said nothing, his gaze shifting to Thomas. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Thomas, feeling the weight of the chief's stare, stepped forward and introduced himself. "My name is Thomas Gray, sir." His voice was respectful but tinged with uncertainty. "I did not mean to cause any offense, but I have agreed to marry Ayana, as is the custom of your people." At his words, the chief raised an eyebrow, his expression hard to read. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, to Thomas's surprise, Chief Tashunka spoke, his voice low and calm. "You have agreed, then?" The words were not a question but a statement, as if the chief had already expected this outcome. "But know this, Thomas Gray. A marriage in our tribe is not to be taken lightly. It is not just an agreement, it is a bond that holds both honor and responsibility." Thomas nodded, though he still wasn't sure what that responsibility would entail. He had agreed to marry Ayana because there seemed to be no other choice. But he wasn't prepared for the reality of what being married in the Apache tribe would mean. "I understand. Chief, I will do my best to honor the agreement." Chief Tashunka studied him for a moment longer before speaking again. "Very well. The marriage will take place soon. You will be expected to participate in the ceremonies and learn the ways of our people. You will be tested, Thomas Gray, and you must prove your worth." Thomas swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He had known that agreeing to this marriage would not be easy, but he hadn't anticipated being tested. The weight of the chief's words hung in the air, and he felt the first real stirrings of fear. He had no idea what kind of test he would face, nor was he prepared to learn the customs of the Apache tribe in such a short time. Ayana, watching the exchange, felt a sense of both relief and fear. Her father had not rejected the marriage outright, but she could sense the weight of his expectations. He was a man who valued honor above all else, and he would not accept anything less than the best from his daughter's husband. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the village, Ayana and Thomas were left to contemplate the reality of what lay ahead. The strange agreement that had begun as a matter of honor had now become something more. For better or for worse, their lives were intertwined, and the challenges they would face together had only just begun. Thomas sat by the fire later that night, staring into the flames. He was a man out of his depth, unsure of what to do or how to move forward. He had married Ayana, yes, but he still did not understand the full meaning of the Apache customs or what was expected of him. The days ahead would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. Ayana, too, sat nearby, her thoughts racing. She had made the decision to marry Thomas to preserve her honor, but she now wondered if she had made the right choice. She had been raised to value tradition, but this strange marriage felt like a step into the unknown. Would Thomas be able to learn the ways of the Apache, to become a true member of their tribe? Or would this union only cause more problems for them both? As the fire crackled and the night deepened, both Ayana and Thomas knew that their lives were now bound together. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would have to face whatever came next together. Days turned into weeks, and life in the Apache village became more complicated for Thomas Gray. What had started as a strange accident by the river had now become his reality. He had agreed to marry Ayana, the young Apache girl who had demanded he take responsibility for the mistake. And now, he was trying to understand the customs and expectations of her people. His life was no longer the simple journey he had imagined when he first traveled west. Instead, it was a challenge that grew more difficult with each passing day. The tribe had accepted the marriage, though there were whispers and sideways glances among the villagers. Some of the older members of the tribe, particularly the elders, were not sure what to make of the union between an Apache woman and a man from a distant world. But for the most part, Chief Tashunka had been clear. Thomas was now part of the tribe, and with that came responsibility. Thomas had little idea what he was supposed to do next. He had no family here, no friends. His only companion was Ayana, the girl whose life had become so unexpectedly tied to his. She was not the love of his life, nor had he ever imagined her to be. Yet as days passed, Thomas began to see something in her that he had not noticed before: strength, courage, and a deep sense of loyalty to her people. Despite the unusual and difficult circumstances of their union, Thomas couldn't deny that he had begun to admire Ayana. One morning, After several weeks had passed since the wedding, Ayanna came to him with a request. It was early, the sun just rising over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. The air was crisp and cool, and Thomas was sitting by the fire, sipping water from a wooden cup. "Thomas," Ayanna began, her voice calm but serious, "I need you to come with me. Today you will begin your training." Thomas looked up, his brow furrowed. He hadn't been expecting this training, he asked, confused. "What do you mean?" Ayanna's eyes locked with his, steady and confident. "In our tribe, all men must be trained in the ways of survival. You are now part of our people, Thomas. If you wish to truly belong here, you must learn the skills we rely on: hunting, tracking, and understanding the land. These are things you need to know if you want to stand with us." Thomas hesitated for a moment. The idea of hunting, tracking, and surviving in the wilderness was far from the life he had known in the East. But he also knew that Ayanna was right. If he was to truly be a part of her tribe, he needed to prove himself, not just through words but through actions. He had already made a promise, and he was determined to keep it, even if it meant facing the challenges of a completely different way of life. "I understand, Ayanna. I'll come with you." He stood up, brushing the dust from his trousers, and followed her as they left the village. As they walked through the desert, Ayanna explained the basics of the training. "You will learn how to hunt deer, how to track animals, and how to read the signs of the land. Every Apache man must be able to do these things. We are a people who rely on the earth to survive. The land gives us everything we need: food, shelter, medicine, but only if we know how to take care of it and understand its language." Thomas listened carefully, trying to absorb the information. His own life had been simple in a way. He had worked in the cities, learning a trade and doing what was necessary to survive. But out here in the desert, life was different. Everything was tied to nature, the land, the animals, the sky. It was a way of life that Thomas had never fully understood before. As they walked deeper into the wilderness, Ayanna stopped and pointed to the ground. "See these tracks?" she asked. Thomas leaned down to look closely. The tracks were clear, distinct hoof prints the shape of a deer's feet. "This is how you know where the deer have been," Ayanna explained. "The tracks will lead us to them, but we must be careful. We do not want to alert them." Thomas nodded, trying to follow her example. He crouched down beside her, examining the tracks carefully, just as she had done. He had never paid attention to such details before, and he felt a little foolish for not having learned these things earlier. "You must be quiet now," Ayanna whispered. Motioning for him to follow her, the two of them moved silently through the brush, following the tracks. It was difficult for Thomas to keep up. He was not used to moving so quietly or so quickly through the desert terrain. His boots scraped against the ground, and he had to be careful not to make noise. But Ayanna moved with grace, her feet barely making a sound on the earth. As they reached a small clearing, Ayanna held up a hand to stop him. She motioned for him to crouch low and be still. Ahead of them, a group of deer grazed peacefully, unaware of their presence. Thomas felt his heart race as he crouched, watching the animals. The stillness of the moment was powerful, and for the first time since his arrival in the village, Thomas felt a deep connection to the land. The world around him seemed so alive, so full of energy. He understood in that moment why the Apache people held such reverence for nature. Ayanna turned to him, her expression serious. "Do you understand now, Thomas? This is how we live. We take only what we need, and we give back to the land in return. This is our way." Thomas nodded, his mind buzzing with the knowledge he was gaining. "I think I understand," he said quietly. After a few more moments of watching the deer, Ayanna stood and began to move away, signaling that they were done for the day. They had not taken a deer, but that was not the point. The lesson had been about understanding the land and the need for respect. On the way back to the village, Ayanna spoke again. "You have done well today, but remember, this is just the beginning. You must continue to learn, and you must prove yourself over time. We do not judge a man by his words alone, but by his actions." Thomas was silent for a moment, reflecting on what she had said. He knew he had a long way to go before he could truly understand the Apache way of life. But one thing was clear. He was starting to see the world through Ayanna's eyes. It was a world that was connected, that was in harmony with the earth. It was a world that, for the first time, he felt he might be able to become a part of. As they returned to the village, Thomas felt a sense of accomplishment. He had learned something new that day, something that had nothing to do with the skills he had brought with him from the East. He had learned the value of patience, of understanding the land, and of respecting the traditions of a people who had lived in harmony with the earth for generations. Ayanna, walking beside him, glanced at him with a look of approval. "You are starting to understand, Thomas, and that is the first step." Thomas smiled, grateful for her guidance. He was far from being fully accepted into her world, but with each passing day he was getting closer. The sun had reached its highest point in the sky, and the heat of the Arizona desert was nearly unbearable. The air shimmered above the earth, and the sound of the wind whispered through the dry brush. Despite the unrelenting heat, there was a sense of tension in the Apache village. Thomas Gray had become a part of the tribe in a way he never could have imagined. He had trained with Ayanna, learned how to hunt, and gained a deeper understanding of the Apache way of life. But despite his efforts, there were still many who were unsure about the marriage between him and Ayanna. Though Chief Tashunka had given his approval, there were whispers among the elders and some of the younger members of the tribe. They watched Thomas closely, not yet fully trusting him. It wasn't just his outsider status that troubled them. It was the very fact that he was an American settler. The settlers had long been enemies to the Apache, and many of the tribe still held a deep resentment for the encroachment on their land. One evening, as the village prepared for the evening meal, Old Wolf, a respected elder in the tribe, gathered a small group of villagers around the fire. His face was weathered by years of life in the desert, his eyes sharp and his voice steady. Old Wolf had seen many seasons pass, and he had witnessed the struggles of his people firsthand. He was a man who valued tradition above all else and believed that the customs of the Apache were sacred. "This marriage between Ayanna and Thomas is a dangerous thing," Old Wolf said, his voice low but clear. "We cannot forget that he is one of them, the settlers who have taken our land, our homes. How can we trust him? How can we let him become part of us?" A few of the younger men around the fire nodded, agreeing with Old Wolf's words. There was a murmur of discontent among them. The tribe had always been united in its defense of the land, and the idea of accepting an outsider into their fold was unsettling. Some of them questioned whether Thomas could truly understand the hardships their people had endured at the hands of settlers. Could he ever be trusted? Meanwhile, Ayanna was walking back from the river with Thomas when they overheard the conversation. She stopped in her tracks, her heart sinking at the sound of her people's disapproval. She had known that some of the tribe would be uneasy about the marriage, but hearing it spoken so openly was painful. She had made her choice, and now she was beginning to question whether it had been the right one. Thomas, sensing her unease, stopped beside her. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. Ayanna hesitated for a moment, then nodded toward the group of villagers. "They are talking about our marriage." Her voice was soft but filled with a hint of sadness. "They don't believe you belong here." Thomas's expression hardened. He had worked so hard to prove himself to Ayanna and her people, but now it seemed that no matter what he did, he would never truly be accepted. His heart sank at the thought of being rejected by the very people he had come to respect. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered, more to himself than to Ayanna. "I didn't ask for any of this." Ayanna turned to him, her eyes filled with both determination and pain. "I didn't ask for this either, but I made my choice. I knew that the tribe would be difficult to convince. They don't understand that you are not like the others." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the ground. He didn't want to argue with Ayanna. He knew she was only trying to help. But the weight of the situation felt overwhelming. How could he prove himself to a tribe that viewed him as a threat, a symbol of everything they had fought against for years? Later that evening, Ayanna's father, Chief Tashunka, called for a meeting of the tribe. The village gathered around the large fire pit in the center, and the air was thick with anticipation. The chief stood tall, his posture commanding respect. His eyes scanned the crowd, taking in the faces of his people. Ayanna stood beside him, her head held high, though she could feel the tension in the air. She had no idea what her father would say about the growing unrest within the tribe. "We gathered tonight because our people are divided," Chief Tashunka began, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "There are some among us who believe that the marriage between Ayanna and Thomas is a threat to our way of life. They fear that we are allowing an outsider into our ranks, someone who does not share our history, our struggles, or our bond with the land." Ayanna could feel the eyes of the villagers on her, some filled with skepticism, others with outright hostility. She had hoped that her father would speak in their favor, but she could see that even he was unsure of what the right course of action was. "I will say this," Chief Tashunka continued. "Thomas Gray is an outsider, yes. He is a settler, a man from a world we do not trust, but he has come to us with a willing heart. He has trained with us, learned our ways, and shown respect for our land. He has proven that he is willing to fight for our people, even when it is not easy." There was a long pause as the tribe considered the chief's words. The murmurs of doubt didn't fade, but Chief Tashunka's voice was firm and his authority could not be denied. "We will not reject this man because of where he comes from," he said. "We will judge him by his actions, not his past. If he truly wants to be a part of us, he must continue to prove himself. His actions will determine his place in our tribe." With those words, the tension in the air seemed to shift. The elders, though still uncertain, began to nod slowly as if coming to terms with the chief's decision. Old Wolf, however, remained silent. He was not ready to accept Thomas so easily, and it was clear that his opinion would not change overnight. Ayanna turned to Thomas, who had been standing silently behind her. His face was a mixture of relief and uncertainty. He had won a small victory, but he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There were still many who did not trust him, and no matter how much he tried to prove himself, he would have to work twice as hard to earn the respect of the tribe. "Thank you, Chief," Ayanna said, her voice filled with gratitude. Her father gave her a small nod but said nothing more. He turned to leave, his thoughts no doubt heavy with the decisions he had to make for the future of his people. Ayanna watched him walk away, then turned back to Thomas. "This is only the beginning," she said softly. "You have to keep showing them that you belong. But it won't be easy. There are many who still don't believe in you." Thomas nodded, a quiet determination settling in his chest. He wasn't ready to give up, not now. Not when he had come so far. He had made a promise to Ayanna, and he was willing to fight for it no matter how difficult it would be. Days passed and the tension in the Apache village slowly began to settle, but Thomas still felt the weight of his position. He had proven himself in small ways, learning the ways of the land, showing respect for the tribe's customs, and even managing to assist in hunting. But there was always the shadow of doubt that lingered over him. The elders, especially Old Wolf, were still hesitant to fully accept him. He was an outsider, and in their eyes that was something that could not be overlooked so easily. But Thomas was determined to continue. He had made a promise to Ayanna, and though he had come to the village under strange and difficult circumstances, he was beginning to feel that he belonged here. In the early mornings he would rise before the sun, practicing with a bow and arrow, perfecting his aim. He worked hard, learning not just how to hunt but how to survive in the harsh desert. It was not an easy life, but it was one that he was slowly coming to appreciate. One day, as Thomas was out practicing with the bow, Ayanna came to find him. She had been busy with the daily tasks of the village, but she had noticed the quiet determination in his actions, and she knew it was time to speak with him. "Thomas," Ayanna called, walking toward him as he stood in the shade of a large rock. "We need to talk." Thomas lowered his bow and turned to face her. There was a look of seriousness in her eyes, but also something softer, something that spoke of the bond they had begun to build. Despite the challenges they had faced, the strange circumstances that had brought them together, Thomas had come to respect Ayanna in ways he hadn't expected. She was strong, intelligent, and unyielding in her beliefs, and in many ways he admired her more each day. "What's on your mind?" Thomas asked, his voice steady but curious. Ayanna hesitated for a moment before speaking. "The tribe is watching you," she paused. "Not just because you're married to me, but because of what you've done. They see you working, learning, trying to become one of us. But there are still some who aren't sure." Thomas nodded, understanding what she meant. He had felt the cold stares of the elders and the whispers of doubt that still followed him through the village. He was an outsider, and no matter how much he tried to prove himself, it was going to take time before he was fully accepted. "I know, Ayanna," Thomas said, looking down at the ground for a moment. "I don't expect them to just accept me overnight. I've been an outsider my whole life, and it's not going to be easy to fit in here. But I'm not giving up. I'm here to stay." Ayanna's expression softened as she stepped closer to him. "I know you're trying, Thomas, and I know you want to be a part of our people." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "But there's something you need to understand. No matter what you do, there will always be some who won't accept you. There are some who will never see you as one of us. But that doesn't mean you stop trying. It doesn't mean you give up on us. Thomas felt a pang in his chest as he heard her words. It was true. There would always be people in the tribe who would never truly accept him. He was from a different world, a world that had caused so much pain for the Apache, and no matter how much he tried to prove that he wasn't like the others, there would always be the weight of history between them. But there was something in Ayana's eyes that made him feel as though there was still hope. She didn't expect him to be perfect. She didn't expect him to change the past, but she believed in the possibility of change in the future, and that was enough. "I won't give up on you, Ayana. I won't give up on us," Thomas said, his voice steady and filled with determination. "Even if it's hard, even if they don't accept me right away, I'll prove myself. I'll show them that I'm not just an outsider. I'm a part of this now." Ayana smiled faintly. "I believe you." But just as they shared a moment of quiet understanding, the air around them seemed to change. The sound of approaching voices grew louder, and Thomas turned to see a group of men coming toward them, led by none other than Old Wolf. The elder's face was as stern as ever, his eyes sharp as he studied Thomas from a distance. "Ayana." "Thomas," Old Wolf called as he and the others approached. "We need to speak with you." Ayana stood tall, her posture straight, and turned to face the men. Thomas felt his heart race, knowing that whatever was coming, it would not be easy. The tension between him and Old Wolf had never fully disappeared, and he could sense that this moment would be important. "What is it?" Ayana asked, her voice calm but commanding. Old Wolf stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Thomas. "We have watched you, Thomas Gray. We have seen how you work, how you try to learn the ways of the Apache." He paused for a moment, his gaze steady. "And though there are still some among us who doubt you, we can see that you are not like the others." Thomas held his breath, unsure of where this conversation was going. He glanced at Ayana, who was looking at Old Wolf with quiet resolve. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that could either make or break his place in the tribe. "You have shown respect for our ways," Old Wolf continued, "and we, the elders, have decided that we will not judge you based on where you come from. We will judge you on your actions, your heart, and your commitment to our people." Ayana's eyes widened slightly as she heard the elder's words. This was it. This was the moment Thomas had been working toward. "We accept you, Thomas Gray, as one of us," Old Wolf said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But you must prove yourself still. You must continue to show us that you belong, and that will take time." Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew that this was only the beginning. It wasn't a complete acceptance, but it was a significant step forward. There would still be challenges ahead, but at least now he knew that he was on the right path. Ayana stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've done it, Thomas. This is just the start." Thomas smiled, feeling the weight of the past few months lift off his shoulders. He had come so far, and now, for the first time since his arrival, he felt like he had truly earned his place among the Apache. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of gratitude. Ayana nodded, her eyes filled with pride. "This is only the beginning, Thomas. There's much more to come, but for now we take a step forward together." And with that they walked back toward the village, their future uncertain but full of promise. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was a road they would travel together.